Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to RotoCurve Live. It's been 2 weeks. RotoCurve team was busy last week in New York City for the DraftKings FFWC. It was a lot of fun. But welcome back to RC Live. Of course, I'm Josh Collacchi. Unfortunately, there's some issues with lower thirds, some kind of technical difficulties that Google is having. But we'll figure that out because the guys that really matter have their lower thirds. As always, with me on RC Live, that's Adam Pfeifer and Jim McCormick. So what we do on RC Live, which as always is presented by rosters.com. If you haven't been sure to sign up yet, head over there and try the promo code CURVE for an instant $20 bonus on your $10 deposit. So be sure to check that out. But RC Live each and every week. This is week 15. What we like to do, Adam, Jim, and I will discuss how we are approaching the slate ahead in NFL DFS. So what we like to do here is just talk about our favorite players. And then at the end, my favorite part about RC Live shows we have our bold calls, which have yielded some interesting results. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. NFL week 15 DFS. Let's start with quarterbacks. Jim, we'll start with you this week because I think Adam has a lot to say about quarterbacks.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Suck.
Yeah, I don't think the field's that great, obviously, but I do actually identify a couple guys that I'm really comfortable with. Aaron Rodgers is not difficult to be comfortable with because you're paying up, right? But still, the price is somewhat reasonable on DraftKings, particularly. And, he's back. It wasn't that long ago, maybe week 5, week 6, people were questioning if there is kind of a career regression in place here because it was a multi-year trend of lack of efficiency with yards per attempt and stuff like that with Rodgers. But, it's pretty clear he's back, and that he's continued to be elite. I think he has one of the top 12 fantasy points per game averages of, since the post-merger, among quarterbacks. That's pretty good. So it's not just a good fantasy season, it's trending towards historic. And he's completed 74% of his passes with 7 touchdowns, 84% completion rate within 10 yards over the last 3 games. And that includes 7 throwaways. So it goes up to 90%, which is just amazing. So basically, he's automatic within the sticks. And then we all know that he's got a great deep ball as well. So, I mean, I think the thing is, too, there's a question with like Davante Adams, for example. Would Davante Adams really thrive in other systems? I'm not so sure. I think Rodgers has a penchant for being a star maker. He makes guys look great. Look at James Jones last year off the street, and he gets some double-digit touchdowns. I mean, that to me is kind of the measure of a guy who can elevate the statistics of the guys around him. And the Bears, even though they have somewhat respectable defensive metrics, game script should really trend heavy for ball possession with clock dominance, the kind of stuff where basically Rodgers could have the ball all day against a Matt Barkley offense. And even the Green Bay defense, there's the positive correlation between how well Rodgers is playing and now the defense is starting to show up. So, I mean, I just think he's the safest of all the guys you pay up for. I know Matt Ryan is definitely in that category, but I could also see 3 to 4 touchdowns going to the backfield. Obviously, Ryan could be involved in those. I'm not fading Ryan at all. I'm just trying to say I think, Rodgers really drives the engine, and he's the complete offense for the Packers. There's really no other person that – it's not that he's Cam Newton, but he reminds me of Cam last year where everything's going to funnel through him for them to win.
Yeah, what
it's
do they have?
It's a good point you make on Rodgers. Because
Bro, what do they have? What do they have? Like 1 rushing touchdown this year, and it's him? Or did they get one with the back? Montgomery got one last week, I think.
If you take out Rodgers, I think they're 29th in rushing yardage. If you take out Rodgers, and if you took out Montgomery, they'd be like dead last. From actual running backs, they have 600 yards rushing this year, which is amazing.
Yeah, that sounds like a Giants 3-week period that he had earlier this year. So, but yeah, it was interesting what you mentioned on Aaron Rodgers because he's $200 cheaper than Ryan, who you were comparing him to on DraftKings. The same price on FanDuel and on rosters, Rodgers is actually $800 cheaper. So, like you said, it's not like it's a situation where Chicago's defense is incredible. It's not like it's a situation where they're going to be running the ball a lot and Rodgers won't have the ball. So, I'm with you, Jim. I think he's the top quarterback on the board this week. Adam, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like Ryan is probably, if you project for just raw points, might be a little bit higher, but I'm a huge Rodgers guy. Like I was like getting in legitimate arguments with people in the beginning of the year where people said he was bad. Like I never didn't think he was the best quarterback in the league. Like that throw to Davante Adams, that touchdown pass last week, like he's the best. But yeah, I mean, if you want to pay up, I mean, I think Ryan is going to be kind of a little bit underowned, even though quarterback is terrible this week, because if you want to play DJ and Le'Veon and McCoy and those guys, you might not be able to fit Ryan. And
right.
It's just the Niners, man. Like they're just
that point
terrible.
total. I mean, it's like I can't remember a 32.5 point team total. I mean,
yeah,
it was like the opposite of last night.
That's with the belief that Julio is probably going to sit. So like, I mean, they're allowing the third most passing plays of at least 20 yards this year. Ryan is second in 20-yard passing plays, leads the NFL in 40-yard passing plays. That's why I really have been interested in this Atlanta offense, because they just game plan so well. And that could make the case that it's going to be a Freeman Coleman week, but they're both so good in the passing game that Ryan could dump one off and they could take it to the house. So I'm not too worried about that. Ryan actually leads RotoCurve's fantasy points per attempt metric at 0.65. You're going to get extra possessions this has already been one of the most efficient quarterbacks in fantasy this season. Plus, you're getting extra possessions with the Niners' pace. So I love Matt Ryan. And then newsflash, Tyrod is going to be talked about. I probably shouldn't talk about Tyrod because I'm going to go on a tangent about why people need to chill on him. But to put it simple, 11 of the 13 quarterbacks that face Cleveland have had multiple touchdown passes. Tyrod has 30 rushing yards in 6 of his last 7 games. I think like 30% of the Browns' opponents' drives ends in touchdowns, so just really bad. I think there's a little bit of narrative here too. I mean, Tyrod's going to want to prove that he's worth the investment. He's probably going to want to play well, and I'm a little bit worried. We talked about this before coming on air that it's just a huge McCoy Gillislee week, but Buffalo has a pretty nice implied team total. They're at home where their offense has been really good this year. And it's just the floor. Tyrod's already been a floor monster for fantasy for most of the season. Plus, you get the boosted floor of playing the Browns. And I'm definitely going to be interested in him for sure.
Yeah, the one thing I like about Tyrod is that price. We talk about every single week, seems like, for the last 14 games. Tyrod has always been underpriced. He's been worth it in cash. But the way I look at him this week is if you do decide to use him, and I think people will in cash, Joe Flacco is the same price on essentially every site, except for rosters. He's a little bit more expensive at $1,500 more. But what I like a lot about Flacco is he faces a defense in the Eagles that in the beginning of the season, first 3 or 4 games, they were in the top 5 or top 10 in every category. Now they're trending almost the complete opposite of that, which tells you when you look at trends in the nature of sample sizes, just how bad they've been over the past 4 or 5 games. They can't defend anybody through the air. They're not really stopping anybody on the ground anymore. And we know Flacco is going to be a situation where he throws 40-plus times. If this game remains close, which I do think is a possibility, we're talking about a floor for Flacco of 250 and 2 touchdowns. I really think that's a possibility for him to go over 303 touchdowns. So for me, 5,700, if I'm not paying up, I'm really looking in Flacco's direction, that's for sure.
It's ridiculous. That's how bad quarterback is. I mean, I wrote up Flacco this week. I think it's the first time other than the Browns game that I wrote him up. But like, yeah, we talk about this all the time, Josh. Like this Eagles defense is just not good. I mean, they played a bunch of scrubs in the beginning of the year. They and the Raiders allow the most 20-yard passing plays. They're not taking shots downfield, Baltimore. I mean, Flacco's like 29th in yards per attempt, but they're going to have some success taking shots with Mike Wallace and Perriman. Over the last 3 weeks, they're allowing 290.7 passing yards per game. The Eagles have been responsible for a top 12 quarterback in 6 of their last 7 games. So I think Flacco is pretty safe here. And there should be a good amount of passing in this game. Like I don't know this game could be a shootout or it could be like 17-9. But over the last 3 weeks, the Eagles lead the NFL in passing play percentage. Baltimore's 4th. So there could be a lot of passing in this game.
Yeah, I agree. I'm actually a big fan of this game compared to some other ones because I'm not exactly sure a lot of people are going to be on it, but more on that later. Jim, what do you think about some cheaper quarterbacks this week?
Well, I mean, he's not particularly cheap. He's kind of, I guess, mid-tier, but I do think, if you're going to be playing in a bigger tournament or a field that has Monday included, and I know a lot of people the crowd tends to, if not fade, just avoid the Monday night thing for the tilt factor, waiting. And also just like the bigger fields usually don't include Monday, but I do think there's if you are going to play Monday, you're going to play that Monday, Thursday slate next week, that Cousins is just in an awesome spot. I think it's time, like the referendum's kind of over. I mean, like whether we consider him an elite quarterback is obviously, he's not elite, but he's statistically very special so far. And just the offense is so fantasy friendly. I mean, I don't think people are recognizing enough that Washington isn't just like a good offense. They've actually been like one of the top 3 or 4 offenses in the league. in terms of they've averaged 6.85 yards per play at home, which is the most in the NFL. 2.97 points per drive at home, second only to the Falcons at home. That's 57% higher than league average, per drive production. Cousins is on pace for about 5,000 yards. There's this trio of Breeze, Cousins and Ryan. They're all on pace for right around 5,000 yards, and Breeze is on pace for well over 5,000. But then there's like a 500-yard drop-off. So it's really they're in their own tier yardage-wise in terms of volume. Since week 9, he's averaging 318 yards per game, most in the league. So just the volume is what I'm chasing. It's also the fact that the desert metrics, the Vegas metrics, are just so friendly for the Redskins. They're projected for 28.5 points. I think that's second only to the Falcons' huge line. Because talking about they're like basically a touchdown favorite at home in a 50-point game against this Panthers team who. Yeah, last week they were all over Phillip Rivers, but I think that's more of a Chargers issue in terms of their leaky line. And Chargers have been Rivers has been pressured this year more than ever. I mean, I think it's the most pressures he's faced since 2009. So I think again that's more of a San Diego issue. Plus, on the road traveling against this good offense, I just don't think Carolina has the secondary personnel because that's where all the talent is for the Redskins, right? I mean, we can reel off that we probably all would in some way shares of Garcon in tournament, shares of Crowder is really nice this week. Reed and Deshaun can always break one. So when you can name 4 guys that can break you on the perimeter and over the middle, I think it's time to invest in that quarterback. So it just all adds up for a high floor. And also, I think the highest ceiling of the week. I think he has the highest ceiling of all quarterbacks.
Yeah, if they have a 28-point implied team total against a defense that's, other than Thomas Rawls' game a couple weeks ago, has really been really tough against the run. And I like Rob Kelly, but, if they have a 4-touchdown implied total, I think Cousins is getting 3 of those at least if they put up 28 points. So, and if Reed's good, healthier, I mean, he only played, I think, 10 snaps last week. They've been getting gashed in the middle of the field, even with Luke Kuechly. So, with Crowder, Crowder's the GOAT. I love Jamison Crowder so much. But this offense is legitimately against, especially with Kelly running well. He's like Matt Jones. I tweeted this 5 weeks ago. He's Matt Jones, but good at football. There's just too many mismatches for Carolina defense that leads the NFL in passing yards allowed per game on the road. So, yeah, I wish Cousins wasn't on the Monday, so I wish he was Sunday night instead, so I could play him more. But he's a guy I played a lot this year.
Yeah, the thing about Cousins, as Jim mentioned before, with that yardage floor, you're getting a bonus on a lot of sites if you hit that 300-yard mark, and that's very important for cash games because it's free points. And as Jim mentioned, there's only 3 guys that are essentially, I don't want to say locks, but all but locks with Breeze, Ryan, and Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
The difference with Kirk Cousins is he's always much cheaper than those other 2 guys, so definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, last week he threw 2 touchdowns, but it was his first game with under 260 passing yards since week 4. He's only had 2 games with under 260 through the air. He's just been a yardage machine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that helps if he has one of those games where he throws 2 picks or something, or only has 1 touchdown. But that yardage is really tough to ignore. Plus the fact that this is a pass first offense that's just has weapons on every part of the field.
Exactly. Adam, do you have any other guys you want to touch on for quarterback?
Yeah, I kind of think Rivers is interesting. I know he had a terrible game last week, but as Jim alluded to, the pressure was just all over. And this is a second-half guy. This is 3 years in a row where he's just 10 picks over his last 4 games. Luckily, he has 10 touchdowns during that span, which is 2.5 per game. But, he was pressured on 35% of his dropbacks last week. But the Raiders are generating decent pressure, but they're bottom 4 in sack rate. I think this game is really interesting. This might be my favorite game of the slate in tournaments. You don't have to worry about the weather. It has a relatively high total, around 50 points. The Raiders give up a lot of big passing plays, most yards per attempt, most yards per completion, 6th most passing yards per game. And you can make the argument that the Chargers might throw a little more with no Melvin Gordon in there. So I think Rivers is really interesting in tournaments. One more guy cheap for cash. I don't really want to play him in tournaments, but Alex Smith, just because the Titans funnel so much production to the pass. Since week 8, they've allowed the quarterback 4, 12, 3, 10, 9, and 6 in fantasy. So, Smith actually took some shots down the field last week. So that was nice to see. Tyreek Hill's playing well. Macklin's going to get healthier, and Travis Kelce looks like the best tight end in the NFL right now. So, yeah, I don't mind Alex Smith in cash.
There's another guy here, and I'm glad that I know Jim's going to talk about him because we've been talking about him for a little while. He's actually been one of my favorite guys to play over the last month or two because he's just – the name doesn't necessarily correlate with his production. That's Trevor Siemian. So, Jim, take that away. This guy's been great.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There's a natural fade angle. I think people consider him more in like the Brock Osweiler tier than he is in kind of the middle tier of the NFL. And it's – I mean, fantasy-wise, he's certainly in that middle tier. I'd argue that he's closer to that kind of, volume-dependent driven guy than he is like the bottom run because the efficiency is actually starting to show up, and it's volume. He's basically averaged the fifth most fantasy points per game since week 9 in ESPN standard leagues, which their scoring key isn't that much different than the DFS sites. It's a standard kind of yardage and 4 points per touchdown kind of setup, but it's all volume. 40.5 pass attempts since week 9. That's 4th most in the league. 310 passing yards. I think that's 3rd most in the NFL over that stretch. So it's not a small sample. It's a 4-game sample for him over the last 5 weeks. And I think what's most important with Siemian is that it's a schematic thing, right? I mean, this team cannot run. I mean, when Justin Forsett is a factor, and this isn't an insult to him, but he was a street free agent this year, multiple times. He went through waivers multiple times in this NFL, and this is a running back starved NFL. So he basically has been floating around. It wouldn't be surprised if this is his last run in the NFL, and he's basically just there because he's friendly with the Kubiak offense. And I think the other thing too is that Booker's been getting his quarterback killed in pass pro. So. I mean, what I'm saying is that they have no agenda to run. They have no ability to run. And the other thing is, too, I think there's a game script thing here where, Mike Clay posted this in his last, I think, 4 games against Denver. Brady's averaged 49.75 passes per game. That's a ton. I mean, 50 passes a game. So you can imagine this could be a little bit of a long game in terms of a lot of passes, a lot of clock stoppage, and a lot of demand on Siemian to keep pace with that Patriots offense. I know the point total isn't that impressive in this game, but all of these factors, they're all fade angles that I think, support the contrarian interest in a guy who's like thriving off volume. So that's basically my pitch for him is that super cheap. We've already talked about how, and we'll get into running backs, how it's running backs have become the elite commodity after, receivers dominated for the majority of the season in terms of price point. You want to pay up for your backfield this week, and you want to be able to at least afford one elite receiver. Well, to do that, I think you need to pay down at quarterback in cash. This guy's an option along with Tyrod. I think Tyrod's the safest of all these guys, but Simeon's even a tournament guy in the sense that I think his ownership will be so low that if you can get 250 and 2 out of this guy, you're doing well. And that would actually be below what his metrics have been over the last month.
Yeah, with Siemian too, $5,200 on DraftKings, $66 on FanDuel, and on rosters he's under $10K. One of those situations where, regardless of how the game goes in terms of score, as Jim mentioned, if this guy throws 40 times, he's going to accidentally fall to 15 fantasy points, right, which is close to 3 times his salary, which I know people don't necessarily look at an exact number for value in NFL, but 3 times the target is very good for a guy in that price range. So I'm with you on Siemian. I'm actually a big fan of this passing offense and have been for a few weeks in a row because, as Adam said all year, where the ball is going in that offense.
Yeah, it's almost 60%.
It's a concentrated offense, right?
Yeah, it's almost like 60% of the market share goes to DT and Emmanuel Sanders. I wish one of them played in the slot for this matchup because that's where the Patriots have just been lit up. But either way, they can't run the ball at all, like Jim said. They don't have any presence at tight end. They don't have a third wide receiver. They don't have a Welker or anybody anymore. So it's DT and it's Sanders, or it's probably a throwaway or something, or check down.
Let's move on to running backs, but before we do, I want to recap the quarterbacks. We did talk about quite a few guys. Adam mentioned Matt Ryan, and then Phillip Rivers in the middle tier, and of course, Tyrod Taylor as a cheaper option. And we all love Alex Smith's matchup. It's just interesting because he's not exactly the ideal guy you want as a passer. Jim mentioned Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins, who are 2 of the top guys basically on anyone's radar this week, and I think they're excellent plays in cash games and tournaments. As Jim mentioned, that Kirk Cousins has the highest ceiling. Maybe that's his bold call. Maybe he has another one. We'll see. And he also mentioned Trevor Siemian, who we both like as a guy that's just been too consistent in the last month or so. So, you have to keep an eye on him. All right, running backs. As Jim mentioned, this is where you want to spend up each and every week, it seems like, over the last course of the season. So just to start it off, I think everyone's going to be talking about David Johnson. Everybody's going to be talking about Le'Veon Bell. I think it's kind of counterproductive to mention either one of those guys because at this point, they're just plug and play. So, Adam, we'll start with you. Who are the guys you're looking at after those top two?
Yeah, I would not be surprised if LaShawn McCoy had the most fantasy points at running back this week. Buffalo at home, the weather's not like terrible. A little bit of snow, maybe a little wind, but this dude has been incredible this year. 5.2 yards per carry, 3.5 catches per game, 8th in rushing yards, 5th in touchdowns, and it's just a great spot for him. The Bills' offensive line is so good at creating yards before contact. They lead the league in that regard. 2.8 yards per rush before contact. The Browns are allowing over 3 yards before initial contact, the second most in the league. Teams are running the ball 47% of the time against the Browns this year, the second highest rate in the league. Buffalo's calling run 47% of the time, the third highest rate in the league behind Dallas and I forget the other team. But yeah, this is just a great spot for McCoy. He continues to just, even when he doesn't have the biggest rushing game, he continues to dominate in the passing game. So McCoy is right there for me. 10,000 for David Johnson is super expensive. You need him to put up 30 points. Mm-hmm. So McCoy is 8,900 on DraftKings. I'm gonna have a lot of McCoy this week. A must-win game for Buffalo at home. He's gonna get fed for sure.
Now, Adam, question for you. News just came out. I think a little bit was expected though. Cordy Glenn is doubtful. Does that change anything for you?
No, not unless he was playing a defense that actually scared me. Cordy Glenn missed a lot of. He missed a good portion of the game last week. The Steelers were in Buffalo's backfield all game. It was really weird, but Cleveland can't really do that, man. So I'm not worried about it. Buffalo at home has just spent such a better offense. So I wish Cordy Glenn was playing, but Incognito's been great. They've been good enough with the other guys, so I'm not worried.
All right, now, Jim, I know a matchup everyone's been talking about all season long has been running backs against the Niners. I have a feeling you may be talking about one of those guys. Is that right?
Yeah, it's one thing to be bad against the run. It's another to be historically bad. I went back and looked through 2001 to take all the rush defenses over the last 15 NFL seasons. And, the Niners are allowing 148.9 rushing yards per game to tailbacks. Just think about that. That's so, and there's room for Coleman and for Freeman to eat. I love Devonta Freeman here. The price isn't commensurate with those elite guys. I think some of it's the Coleman factor, right? But there's also kind of a home road split thing. I think Coleman's in the majority of the damage on the road. I think that's somewhat of just that's somewhat random and anomaly. But I think some of that has to do with the passing that you do on the road. That there's more ability to check down. But in any case, to get back to the Niners. That's the highest in the NFL. It's the most generous rushing allowance since the 2010 Bills. No offense, Adam. And it's actually, the fourth worst rush allowance since 2001. So this is an historically bad rush defense. Especially, I think you got to understand why that's so amazing is because this is an NFL that's more pass heavy than ever, right? So you're giving up this many yards in an era that actually trends pass heavy, which means everybody knows your weakness. The thing is the implied point total of 32.5, double, 2 touchdown favorites. The correlation, as we know, is so positive between, home running back favorites. And this is a massive favorite. So Freeman could still get 20, 25 touches, especially with the Julio factor. It's an offense that'll probably funnel through their 2 backs. Both backs are on pace for 1,000 total yards, and that's with Coleman's injury. So, I just think the matchup metrics are amazing. Freeman's second only to Melvin Gordon in red zone touches at home this season. So it's a confluence of positive trends that make Freeman an elite tailback this week.
Bro, Atlanta quietly a little bit is they lead the NFL in rushing plays in the red zone. You probably didn't know that unless you studied kind of like we do, or you owned Julio Jones, because they just never throw it there. But there's times at home where they literally run the ball 4 straight times.
It's a 2-year trend too. Last year Freeman feasted on opportunity. It's kind of the Melvin Gordon factor. You can overcome inefficiency with opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm not worried about like people worried about Freeman didn't play a much. It was Coleman last week. Like Coleman's gonna play and get touches, but the Niners have bleeded out fantasy production to multiple backs a ton of times this year. The Tampa Bay, the Buffalo game, like they've allowed what 9 100-yard rushers, and they've allowed multiple touchdown runs in what 7 games. So like I'm not worried. Like either both of them can easily go off, and yeah, Freeman should eat, man. Like especially with no Julio, they should. I think they're both gonna eat. And we know Kyle Shanahan. I talk about it all the time. He game plans better than any offensive coordinator in the league. You have the worst run defense in the NFL. He knows that. You have no Julio Jones, and you have 2 backs that have been insanely productive this season. They're going to be heavily involved in the game plan. You got to think.
Now, Jim, my question for you, and I think that we both know the answer, but I want to hear your take on it. You think it's worth using Tevin Coleman as well? Or you don't really have to pick one or the other, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be a unique stack. I think in tournaments it's not insane. I mean, we can harken back to that crazy New Orleans game where both were like, I don't know, like 1 and 2 or whatever in scoring.
They were.
And I mean, I think there's something here. It's just that the Niners have allowed the most rushing touchdowns, the most rushing yards per game, and then we know their linebackers aren't good in space. You know, Nick Bellor and you know Craig. You know, like these guys aren't good in space. It's just it's proven. You know, Gerald Hodges, these guys. You know, these are backups. I mean, it's no offense to these guys. These are NFL backups playing 99% of the snaps. You know, they have Jimmy Ward in there playing tons of snaps. You know, a corner, and then. You know, they're just not very good right now on defense. You know, they're missing Eric Reed, which is one of their better run defenders from the secondary. He's kind of like, I think he led the league in box snaps this year among safeties, so he's out for the year. You know, it's a confluence of trends, like I said. So, yeah, I wouldn't mind playing Coleman because of the price. Like I said with Ricky earlier this week, it's a week to flex running back. So if you're sitting there with 5,100 or 5,200 and, yeah, you want to fill that flex spot, I don't blame you if you're and you already have Freeman. I don't blame you if you're like, listen, because the pie is so big, right? With a 32-point total, the pie is pretty big for them both to score touchdowns. And honestly, Coleman could meet value with 100 total yards and 12 touches without even needing a touchdown.
Yeah, the one thing I think is very interesting for those of you playing on rosters, you can roster Devonta Freeman and Tevin Coleman for combined 18,500.
Like basically now, what Le'Veon Bell cost.
Yeah, Le'Veon Bell is 17,000. So if you could guarantee me 99% of the rushing attack and the attack out of the backfield, 99% of the running back fantasy points against this defense in the San Francisco 49ers at 18,200, I'm taking that every time.
It's like we just saw New Orleans. What was it, like a month ago? They sent up there, and like this was with Ingram in the doghouse. Ingram put up 200 total yards, and then. You know, I think, you know, Hightower put up 2 touchdowns too. So, like, they both feasted.
Exactly.
It's happened before with lesser backfields.
Yeah, there's just too much of a situation, as you were saying, before all the injuries you mentioned, Eric Reed, things of that nature. Now, add in the huge implied total. It's just one of those situations that feels like it can't miss. Now, on the other side of that game, though, there's a guy that I know all 3 of us like. So, Adam, why don't you start kind of convincing people on why Carlos Hyde is a great play this week?
Yeah, I love Carlos Hyde this week so much. He's like Tyrod at running back. He's always underpriced on DraftKings, probably because they don't see him as a pass catching back. But like for starters, like he has 25 receptions this year. It's a decent amount. But The biggest knock on Hyde coming into the year was, he was on a terrible team that we expected to be terrible, which they are, and he would be phased out of the game plan when they got behind. But that hasn't been the case. Like, there's been 7 instances this year where the Niners have had Hyde active, and they've lost by 10 or more points. In those games, he's averaging 18 touches per game. Like, there's been situations where Chip Kelly's just run the ball when they're
Chip
down.
Kelly doesn't care. Chip Kelly doesn't care about games.
Remember that Seattle game earlier in the year? They were getting blasted, and Hyde had like 102 touchdowns because they just ran the ball at the end. So, like, even with this whole spread, I think people are going to be off him because of that. Like, they're going to be behind. Also consider that the Niners are banged up on offense right now. I think Vance McDonald and Torrey Smith are both hurt. Hyde, he's caught a touchdown pass in 2 of his last 3 games, and we know the Falcons just bleed production to backs in general, but especially multi-purpose backs. I mean, they allowed the most receptions and receiving yards to running backs this year, 3rd most fantasy points to running backs. I mean, Hyde is this Niners offense right now. So I love him in tournaments. He just torched the Jets run defense for 200 total yards and a touchdown. Like, he's been really good the last couple weeks. So at 5,900 on DraftKings, like, he's one of my favorite running back plays of the slate. I only made like 4 lineups right now, in general, but he's in like 2 of them so far. Like, I can't get off of him, especially because like he's just their offense, man. It's just there's nobody else, so I like him a lot.
Looking at the last 4 games for Hyde as well, he has 22, 18, 21, and 18 touches. They've lost all 4 games. They've lost 2 of those 4 games by more than 2 possessions. So you know they're going to give him the ball. You know the situation is there with the floor. And this is actually the highest his price has been all season long, and it's still too low at 5,900. So, yeah, Jim, you have any other numbers on him?
On Hyde, I mean, the thing with Hyde is just, it's like really, Adam covered it well. It's just the fact that this is an atypical, like, usually it's a fade position when you're playing a 2-touchdown dog, on the road, but at running back. But it's just the difference is Chip Kelly. As we know, we had him as our coach in Philadelphia. Game flow and game script isn't traditional with this guy at all. There's nothing that he does is traditional, including winning. But yeah, I mean, like you said, Hyde should near a top 20 touches. He's 9th in the NFL in red zone touches per game at 3.10. I think he's top 15 in goal-to-goal touches. So, like, it's opportunity-based. And, their position isn't ideal, but they could be down 21 and still feeding this guy the rock. And, like, I just feel like it's one of those games. I mean, he could pull kind of like a Jaguars type thing out. I mean, what I mean is like just like a garbage 20-point fantasy game where – you're facing these like over pursuing Atlanta young linebackers, and he could break one.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think all 3 of us agree on Hyde being a great play this week. Now, the cheaper side of running backs this week, Melvin Gordon's out. So I think a lot of people will think, you know what, Kenneth Barrow isn't really close, not even close to the same talent level, which may or may not be true. But regardless, there is an incredible amount of volume for somebody to pick up. And I don't think they're going to be throwing the ball the entire time to make up for Melvin Gordon's volume. So, Jim, why don't you touch on Kenneth Barrow? Because I'm a little biased having him being one of my favorite running backs when he was in college at the University of Houston.
Yeah, and he also, he was also a DFS preseason darling too. So I think, people are into him. But the thing with Farrow is, like we said, opportunity rate. It's a 50-point total game. He's at home. I know last week he wasn't great in pass pro, so that could be some of the talk about Hillman. But, I don't trust Ronnie Hillman here. I mean, again, he's similar to Forsett. He might even be worse just in terms of, coming off the street free agent. Not like those guys can't make any impact in terms of snap count, because we saw Forsett do that last week. But, just in terms of actually being able to take the NFL football and move it positively forward, I don't think Hillman's really a threat. I think he might steal some third downs from Farrow, but listen, like we said, this is a team that dedicates, like Adam was saying about Atlanta in the red zone. San Diego's a very similar setup in terms of, outside of Antonio Gates, they're really going to be funneling their offense through the ground. I don't expect the 6 receptions from last week, but I do expect the 16 carries. So I think if you're going to be able to invest in 16 to 20 carries for a back that's sub 5K on DraftKings, against a Raiders team that's not good against the run, I think we have this impression that the Raiders are good on defense because of Khalil Mack. But don't get me wrong, he's all world. He's like he's defensive player of the year in my opinion. But the ability of the rest of their defense and the interior and like their middle linebacker Perry Riley, these guys are all patchwork. So I really think if Farrow gets to the second level, Farrow doesn't even need to have a big play to get this done. I think he could grind out, get you a 90 total yard day, and a touchdown is just obviously going to make him exceed value.
Yeah, I'm with you on Farrow. I think it's one of those situations where not a lot of people will look at him as an elite option. But like you just said, if you're going to be getting 16-plus touches at 4,400 against a Raiders defense that really cannot stop the run, I'm all in for him. Now, on the other side of that game is a guy that has suddenly been an incredible volume guy, Latavius Murray. Adam, you like him this week, right?
Yeah, I like him a lot. So like in the beginning of the year, we were all frustrated because Jack Del Rio came out before the season started and said, "Oh, we're gonna, he's gonna get fed the 25 touches, all this." And then we saw DeAndre Washington and Jalen Richard. Just there was games where the running back usage would literally be like 8, 7, 5, 4. Like that would be their carries with Alawali in there too. But that's completely changed. I mean, Latavius has seen at least 20 touches in 4 of his last 5 games. Since week 9, he's like top 5 in fantasy points at running back. And, he's He's getting all the short yardage work. DeAndre Washington's been a healthy scratch. He scored in seven times over his last 5 games. 9 touchdowns on 12 rushing attempts from inside the 5-yard line this year. It's tied for the most in the league. And this is an Oakland offense that is 3rd in the NFL in rushing touchdowns. Like, they run it up close. And the Chargers are a team that allowed the 3rd most rushing touchdowns on the season. They've been really good in terms of yardage and yards per carry, but I think this game features a lot of points. And this is a team, again, that Murray's getting all the work right now. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's getting all the short yardage work, and I think Oakland moves the ball in this game. So DraftKings, I think, is a nice actual bargain for him. He's going to be a guy I look at a lot too if I'm not playing Le'Veon or DJ, which is kind of asinine to be honest. But running back's loaded this week. It really is.
Yeah, looking at the RotoCurve cheat sheet for running backs, the top RC ratings for running backs are DJ and Le'Veon Bell. We have McCoy and Ezekiel Elliott. But right there with Carlos Hyde's Latavius Murray. That's not on accident. I think that volume there is definitely something to keep an eye on. The matchup better than we expect. And
they get Assembly back too this week. So
yeah, and they have Latavius Murray quietly has 12 touchdowns already. So it's one of those situations where he's
a bunch of 2 touchdowns.
It's the most since Marcus Allen in 1990 for the Raiders. So
he's got a bunch of 2 touchdown games because he's getting the ball inside he's been efficient inside 5 to 3 yards. So
let's recap running back real quick before moving on. I think we had a good discussion about some guys other than Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson, which is something that we need to hear because everybody's going to be on those 2, and it's pretty much moot to talk about them. But we talked about LaShawn McCoy and Devonta Freeman as other top-tier backs in a similar tier, but not in a similar price. Both Jim and Adam both like Carlos Hyde as well as I do. And Jim mentioned a cheap guy in Kenneth Farrow, who is a very good cheap option to use if you want to fit those top guys. And Adam mentioned Latavius Murray, who is underpriced given the matchup and volume for his current situation. So let's move on to receiver. Now, guys, Julio Jones has the best matchup in probably his whole career, and he might not play. And even if he does play, there's a decoy issue there.
So can't play Julio. It sucks.
We're unfortunately have to move on to that second receiver, but fortunately that second receiver is a pretty good one. Adam, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, receiver's kind of tough this week too, kind of correlating with quarterback because Big Ben on the road, Antonio Brown. I mean, the Bengals have covered Antonio Brown a lot better than most teams. So I'm kind of looking back at the well with Mike Evans here on Sunday night. We've seen Evans this is a guy who's consistently seen 11 to 15 targets in a game. He's only seen 14 targets combined over his last 2, 80 yards and 0 touchdowns during that span. But if you look at the games, Tampa Bay's been ahead and playing well in those games. Their defense has been playing the lights out. I think this is a game where they're kind of behind and they get back to that throwing the ball more. I don't see Doug Martin running the ball. Dallas has been really good against the run. 80% of their offensive touchdowns against Dallas have been through the air, the highest rate in the league. He should see a good amount of Brandon Carr, who per Pro Football Focus has allowed the 4th most receiving yards in the NFL. So, and Dallas allows just under 15 receptions per game to receivers, the 4th most in the league. I just think Evans is too good to be held down to these mediocre games. And the only concern is pace. Both these teams kind of hold the ball a lot, but indoors you don't have to worry about weather. Evans is teams are only running the ball 20 times per game against Dallas. That's the lowest rate in the league. So I think Evans is due for a nice bounce back game here for sure. And with Julio not looking like he's going to play, and if he does play, he definitely will be a decoy. I got to look at Evans as the top guy. And then before Jim goes, let me go on my weekly tangent and say play Odell Beckham in tournaments because I don't know why people fade this dude.
Now, Jim, what do you want to add about
how bad would their offense be if they didn't have Odell Beckham?
It'd be pretty bad. It would look like the Eagles.
Yeah, I mean it's sad, but it's incredibly true.
It would be a volume-based offense that averages 5 yards per attempt. That's kind of what it would look like.
I'm actually excited.
Shepard would be Jordan Matthews.
Play, to be honest with you.
Yeah, Shepard would be Jordan Matthews in the slot. I guess Will Tye would be Ertz, and then they'd have Roger Lewis is DGB.
Ryan Matthews is definitely up to be Rashad Jennings. So
yeah. And then Sproles is Vereen. This is interesting.
Yeah, see, now that there's way too many parallels here, I'm starting to just go through all these situations, and they're the same offense. Just the big difference is Eli Manning doesn't bring the ball below his knee to release the ball.
Right.
And unfortunately,
we don't have two rings in the past decade, and
yeah, but other than that, it's the same.
We don't have the all-world receiver, but I'm also on Evans. I think he's obviously just special, and you're seeking differentiation this week. It's difficult. I think the top tier is somewhat compromised. I mean, Hilton doesn't have the best setup. Obviously Jones is compromised. I mean, Brown, I think the fear with Brown is just market share in some sense, because, you got Le'Veon Bell's averaging 7 more carries per anyone else over the last month. So it's such a concentrated offense. I mean, Brown is still, I think, a tournament guy, but I mean, he loses some of his appeal in terms of the high floor. But yeah, Evans is the guy. I don't think Scandrick, any of these guys in Dallas is particularly shutdown worthy. I think it's been a great scheme. I think what they've done defensively, what Marinelli's done is really impressive. Don't get me wrong, but I still think that Evans can eat. And I know outside of the Giants, I mean, Dallas is still second in the league in points per drive, behind only Atlanta. So it's still an elite offense. I still expect there to be some game script where Tampa has to keep up with a better offense. But that should be a good game. It's actually nice to have these, especially after last night. It's going to be nice to have some nice primetime football. But, another receiver that I'm in on is actually Rashard Matthews. It's just, I think the price point, I think anytime you pick up a receiver the week after they play Denver, it can be helpful because recency bias is going to drive them down. I mean, Denver's not just good against receivers. They're like historically dominant in terms of shutting them down. I think they've allowed something crazy like 70% less yards per game than the average, NFL defense to receivers. And that's just the average. So then you go from the toughest defense against receivers to the defense in the Kansas City Chiefs have allowed the most yards. I mean, Kansas City has this reputation, I think, and it's well-deserved as a playmaking defense, but they're not a shutdown defense, particularly with some of these issues. I mean, Phillip Gaines is one of the worst corners in the league. If they can scheme to get Matthews moved around, I know Matthews works up in the slot too, but it's really just what he did over that really sizable sample from week 5 to week 13. He was the beneficiary of that crazy Marcus Mariota run. I think Mariota's passer rating was 135 targeting Matthews, and 7 touchdowns, 0 interceptions targeting him. And then you have the red zone efficiency. And somehow this is a guy who actually, even though his build doesn't suggest it, he's been really efficient in the red zone. And that even dates back to what he was doing with Miami. So, yeah, I just like Rashard Matthews. The price point, like we said, we want to pay up for some of these guys. If you want to afford a McCoy, if you want to get into a McCoy-Freeman backfield, you're going to need to save some money. And I think you can afford one elite receiver and still get a guy like Matthews in your lineup, and you don't give up that much cost certainty.
Yeah, I'm with you on Matthews. I definitely agree with the notion of discussing the fact that you can take receivers after they play Denver and their price always drops. Just how the way the matchup works with the pricing algorithms. Their ownerships will be low and their production will be low, as we've seen for almost 2 or 3 years now with receivers against this Denver team. So it's one of those situations at 4,600. He's very cheap. He's going to get the targets when they're going to pass the ball. And it's one of those situations where, although it's going to be cold, they can't run the ball 700 times. I know at some point they're going to have to throw the ball down the field. And other than Delaney Walker, the only guy in that passing offense worth targeting right now is Rashard Matthews. Now, the thing is, I'm looking at the pricing. The guys that he's around, Randall Cobb, Sterling Shepard, Tyler Boyd, who are all decent targeted guys, Anquan Bolden, Ted Ginn, and underneath that is Allen Robinson, who, let's pour one out for this guy. He's fallen all the way to 4,400 on DraftKings, which is insane to think about. He was nearly twice that in the beginning of the season, but it's not even worth mentioning anymore because he just hasn't been worth his price despite it dropping all the way this far. So to recap that, essentially, I think that Rashard Matthews is an excellent option at that price. Now, Adam, you have some other guys in kind of the middle tier for receivers. Do you want to discuss this week?
Yeah, ice up, son. Steve Smith, I don't want him to retire. He's so awesome, but yeah, so the opposing top pass catcher on offense has gone 80 yards or a touchdown in 7 consecutive games against the Eagles. Rich Rebar pointed out that they've allowed a top 10 fantasy receiver in 7 consecutive games. Their corner, we know how bad their corners are. Steve Smith should obliterate these corners. And over the last 3 weeks, Opponents are completing 73.6% of their passes, the highest rate in the league. And we remember a couple earlier in the season, Flacco had that what game where he had like in a row. He almost set the record. Like that could be a trend this week if Steve Smith just continues to get open, which he could. I know I'd like Mike Wallace a lot in tournaments because the Eagles are tied for the most 20-yard passing plays allowed on the season. They just gave up a big one to D-Jax last week, and that's Mike Wallace's game. But Steve Smith and cash, I think, is really interesting. Smith has at least 4 catches for 50 yards in 5 of his last 6 games. He's the most targeted receiver in this offense. We talked about how Baltimore has been throwing a lot. These corners are not going to be able to stick him. Only the Raiders are allowing more yards per completion than the Eagles. So, yeah, I like Steve Smith a lot. The price is more than fair, and he's just like, it just comes down to him being way, way, way better of a receiver than these corners are at playing cornerback, and he's only 5,300. So, a lot of Steve Smith interest for me. I'm interested in Mike Wallace as well in that same game in tournaments, but I think Smith is the preferred cash guy.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Wallace because he's one of my favorite guys to roster this week. And he's been known for his entire career as a tournament guy. But as you alluded to, he's actually been very safe. He has over 900 yards receiving this year. Has a bunch of games with 3 or more catches or even 4 or more catches.
I wrote him up in my bargains article. I think he has like 50 or 40 receiving yards. His lowest receiving total is like 52 over his last like 6 or 7 games or something like that. So like he's not just like 3 plays, he'll take a shot and then he's not in the offense. Like he's not at, like, if he doesn't get the 60-yard touchdown ever, he's not giving you as big of a hole in your lineup as a guy like Deshaun Jackson would.
Yeah, exactly. He's the same price and the same skill set as those tournament guys, but he has a higher floor, which I think is definitely the way why you should trend towards him in that price range of the high 4,000s. Now, the thing I like about him and this entire passing offense, really, I wanted to touch on it. You can roster Flacco, Smith, and Mike Wallace all for the price of under $16,000 between the 3 of them. So I definitely think that's something that you should keep an eye on because we mentioned the price with these other guys. Like on DraftKings right now, David Johnson is $10,100. So if you can have the 3 guys, basically the whole passing offense for just $5,000 more, you can spend up at other places. And honestly, with how cheap they are, you can probably put David Johnson in that lineup. So it's really interesting to look at. I do like both of those receivers as well. Now, Jim, my top receiver this week, I actually see him listed on your sheet here, is Jordy Nelson. Why don't you tell everybody why?
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually meant J.J. Nelson there. But I'm going to pay down for J.J. Nelson.
I like Jordy too, though.
I like
sneaky, man. He's so good in cold weather.
I like Jordy as well.
What does he have, 7 more red zone targets?
Yeah, he's a touchdown monster.
Yeah,
I think Jordy kind of gets passed over because he just it's almost like he's getting, it's almost like kind of how last year, to me, he's actually having like Brandon Marshall's year last year. Not the receptions because the volume's not there, but kind of every week people kind of just like were kind of ho-hum with Brandon Marshall, and he kept putting up the numbers. But yeah, Jordy Nelson's amazing. But my thing there, we're just going really cheap on J.J. Nelson for tournaments. 99th percentile in the 40-yard dash among draft prospects since 1999. That's a mock draftable kind of reference. And his best player comps are like T.Y. Hilton, John Brown, these elite speedsters, Ted Ginn, like that's kind of the build he is. And I know last week's touchdowns were like an anomaly in the sense that it's almost Tyreek Hill-esque, but like with less work in terms of 52-yard touchdown on the ground and that short touchdown in the red zone. But he's had multiple red zone touchdowns this year. So it's not just a big play thing. And it's just the home setup. Again, I want to get into these 50-point home favorites. And, Fitzgerald's pricey. I think he has a high floor, but in terms of the ceiling, the Deshaun Jackson-esque, or the Devery Henderson, maybe he's more like Devery Henderson, or I'll give, Adam a bone here and say maybe he's like a Lee Evans, right?
Yeah.
And he can catch 3 for 130 and 2. That's obviously the ultimate ceiling for him, but I just think there's a lot of upside there. I know Palmer's been terrible, but that hasn't precluded them from passing downfield. Like, they don't care if he's playing bad. They're going to keep trying the same thing over and over again. So I think Palmer's going to go down swinging, and I think the point total in that game is realistic. And Arizona just plays better at home. I mean, most teams do, but they particularly play well at home, especially in these cold weather weeks. I think it's best to stick with kind of, these good environments.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned J.J. Nelson because it seems to me that I'm illiterate, which happens a lot nowadays. But I did want to mention Jordy Nelson. You guys alluded to it a little bit. The guy has been incredible in terms of consistency, at least 10.8 PPR points in all but one game this season, Oddly enough, that game did come against the Chicago Bears, his opponent this week, but I do not see that happening twice in one season. He leads the NFL in red zone targets. He has 8, 8, and 6 receptions in the last 3 games, including targets of 10 and 12 in 2 of the last 3. The situation I liked, though, last week against Seattle, he caught 6 of his 7 targets. Now, I know Seattle didn't have Earl Thomas, which completely changes that cover 3 and cover 4 look that they give to every single team. But the reason why I'm looking at that is he's been successful against better secondaries than the Bears. So for me, I think with the situation arising with all the running backs in Green Bay kind of taking a back seat to the passing offense, I just think I want that number 1 option. And he's over $1,000 cheaper than those other top guys we mentioned before.
He's good in cold weather too. In case you're worried about that, like for whatever reason, he balls out in cold weather. So maybe it's just a coincidence because half his games are always in cold weather because he plays in Green Bay. But like,
yeah, and even in college, he played in the Great Plains all winter too, in Kansas State.
Jordy's one of my guys. Like he's awesome.
Now, I wonder if I have to make a lineup now with Jordy and J.J. Nelson, right, Jim? I just have to put both the
Yeah, you have to get your Nelsons involved. You do, I mean, this is an old school reference.
Nelson Michael or anything. I won't do that.
Yeah, you don't want Judd Nelson, that's an old school reference. That's the guy from Breakfast Club. So there you go. I'm old.
All right, let's recap receivers real quick. We both, Adam and Jim, both like Mike Evans as well as I do, but I'm going to be looking at Jordy Nelson as my top guy this week because I don't want to spend all that money for Evans, who has had 2 bad games. I think correction is coming, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's that safe because he can lead to a bust in that environment against Dallas. We talked about Rashard Matthews, Steve Smith, I know Adam liked some Raiders guys we talked about earlier this week on 1st and goal with Michael Crabtree and Amari Cooper. And we mentioned guys in the cheaper realm like Allen Robinson. Don't play him. Even though he's 4,200, don't use him. He's not to that point yet. So let's move on to tight ends here, guys. Not a lot to like, again. But the thing is, the best tight end in the NFL right now, as Adam mentioned, Travis Kelce is a thing again. Adam, we want to talk about the record he's looking towards?
Yeah, he's got 4 consecutive 100-yard games. He's one off the NFL record for tight end. He's finally seeing the consistent targets we were waiting for over the last couple seasons. He's clearly their best offensive player. It's not a great matchup. I mean, you like targeting guys on the outside against the Titans, but the problem is, Kansas City doesn't really have those guys. I mean, Tyreek Hill's been great. Maclin hasn't. But I think if you're paying up for tight end, Kelsey's fine.
Wouldn't it be a record if he gets another 100 yards too?
Yeah, it'll be 5 straight. The NFL record. Yeah, he's fine. And then I really want to play Jordan Reed if I'm playing Monday. He only played, I think, 10 snaps last game. If I know he's 100% or close to it and he's going to play a lot of snaps, he could go off in the spot. The Panthers allowing the most fantasy points per game to tight ends and the most passing yards per game, one away from home. And then if I'm going cheap, it's Jermaine Gresham. Is just all of a sudden went last year from the best downfield aerial attack in the league to this intermediate one where it's Fitzgerald, it's David Johnson, or it's Jermaine Gresham, who quietly has 5 catches in 3 in each of his last 3 games. He scored in 2 of his last 4 games. I think he's really, really interesting as a punt. I think he's showing he has a pretty good floor. And when you're not interested in a lot of the tight ends, I mean, a guy gets the Saints at 2,500 who's getting 5 catches a game over his last couple games. Throw it. I mean, it's going to be Nelson on long bombs and Fitzgerald and Gresham across the middle.
Yeah, I like the Gresham play. I used him a couple weeks ago just because you kind of saw the uptick in targets, but he was 2,500 and he still remains cheap. I just don't believe he's at that price point minimum right now. I think I am paying up for Kelce looking at it now. I don't think a lot of people will be looking at doing that because it's been about 2 months, maybe a 3-month stretch where everyone has just tried to find a punt at tight end. But the way I look at it is if you take positions aside, you're going to be paying $5,900 for Travis Kelce for a guy that has 70 catches over 900 yards. Touchdowns are low, but I think that will increase with the targets. He has 5, 8, 8, and 7 catches in the last 4 games. The targets have definitely been there with 40 targets in those games as well. The touchdown is coming, and I think in the situation with how cold it is in Kansas City, if they throw the ball, it's going to be a very short pass because of Alex Smith anyway. So I think towards the end zone now, with how cold it is, you want to look at the big guys, the guys that are tough to tackle. And we know about Kelce's ability after the catch. So I just think it makes for a perfect play. Jim, what about you? Tight ends?
They can't
Yeah,
run
that's true too.
lately.
What do you like about a tight end this week, Jim?
Well, I mean, I'm going back to the well with the old man, Antonio Gates. I mean,
Narrative.
I could just sum it up. I mean, like chasing touchdowns, right? I mean, he's not that far from the record. We're talking about record setting tight ends. I mean, I could just also just sum it up and just say Nate Allen. Like, I could just say that because
that sums it up for me.
Carl Joseph didn't practice again, and Allen played 99%. Maybe I think he played all the defensive snaps last week. Maybe he was out for like 1 or 2 snaps. So I mean, he's in charge, and then Reggie Nelson is also 112 years old. So it's a good setup. I mean, like I said, the coverage linebackers, Malcolm Smith, Perry Riley, these guys aren't really anything special. They're actually poor in coverage, and I just think, he led the team in targets last week, and it's Gates. He's potentially going to be involved in my bold calls. I think there's also just a gut factor here where I think it's a Gates week. I just do. I think the confluence of factors with the high point total, home against not a very good secondary, especially in the interior, like meaning, up the middle, the safeties. So, and then the other guy, I do like Gresham a lot. I think the thing with Gresham, the interesting thing is just like the price setters just refuse to shift his price because they're just like, it's Jermaine Gresham. It's Jermaine Gresham. They just don't believe that the usage is there. But hey, 24 targets last 3 weeks. It's really all you need to know. Tight end's so bad that, it's worth doing that. The other one's Ladarius Green. I think last week was the week. Everybody was on Green last week, and he let them down. But, a lot of that, like I said, such a unique situation with Bell getting like 40 touches. And also they weren't efficient in passing. Ben was terrible. Not to say that Ben on the road is a very attractive, play himself, but I think here's the thing. Like, I think the last 3 weeks he's averaging 20.2 yards per catch, which is most in the NFL. And among tight ends, and he gets those downfield looks. And if you give me a tight end, kind of like what Greg Olsen was doing, like a cheap Greg Olsen, if you give me a tight end that's going to get six passes, and the majority of them are 15 yards downfield, there's just a lot of upside there. And the Bengals have given up the most yards to tight ends this year, which also helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing with Gresham, I mentioned that his price came up a little bit. That's actually not true. He's still the minimum of 2,500.
Yeah, because I was listening this week to Sirius, and like Tommy G was like, they just won't move this guy's price.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations, as Adam said, he's scored in 2 of his last 4 games. He has 5 catches or a touchdown in each of his last 4. Before that, he had 4 catches.
No Kenny Vaccaro, all that stuff. It all adds up.
Yeah.
They're just not going downfield this year. So,
and one thing I wanted to mention real quick, Jim, when you mentioned with Gates is, despite the fact that we feel like it's more of a gut situation, I'm actually with you, the numbers back that up too. With Melvin Gordon being out, they have to fill the void in the red zone.
Right.
And some of that's going to filter towards Gates and against those safeties who were both struggled in Florida in college and now in California in the NFL. It just makes for kind of a perfect situation for a guy that I think is going to be under-owned. I agree with you there. All right, wrapping up tight ends, we talked about Jordan Reed. We talked about Travis Kelce, Ladarius Green, and Gates, and also a cheap guy who is still the minimum in Jermaine Gresham. My favorite part of the show is up now, bold calls. Jim, we'll start with you.
I'm going to be very specific, and I'm going to say that Antonio Gates has 57 yards and 2 touchdowns.
How many catches?
Because it's going to be 6 catches. That's an Antonio Gates line. It really is. 6, 57,
57 and 2.
That's it.
On 9.3 targets.
Yes.
All right, I like that. I like that a lot. I'm actually going to try to get some Gates in my lineups. I was back and forth between him and another guy in a similar price range, but he's not even close to the narrative and the matchup is Gates. So, Adam, what about you? Who's your bold call this week?
I swear we didn't talk about this before. My bold call is literally like the same thing in the same game. I was going to say Crabtree has 60 yards and 2 touchdowns this week. Amari Cooper is probably going to see a lot of Casey Hayward, who's been like incredible. Over the last 3 weeks, he's allowed I had the numbers up. He faced DeAndre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, and Mike Evans over the last 3 weeks. And Hayward has limited them to just 0 production. 9 catches, 119 yards, and 0 touchdowns on like 20 targets. He's been literally one of the best corners in the league as of late. So I think Crabtree,
next year, man, that Charger defense.
Yeah, Verrett, Bosa, plus if their offense ever stays healthy, like they could be a dark horse guy or a dark horse team. But yeah, I think Crabtree, 60 yards, 2 touchdowns because Amari Cooper doesn't know how to get in the end zone. Yeah, so I think this is a Crabtree week for me.
All right, so you guys were pretty specific. I think that means I'm going to have to get specific as well. I think LeGarrette Blount has 21 carries for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns and 1 catch.
Oh, I thought you were going to say he's going to have 2 touchdown catches. Come on.
He's going to have – I think he's going to have 2 touchdowns, but I don't think he catches more than 2 passes.
I don't think he catches more than 2 passes, yeah.
So, yeah, that's my bold call to be specific since it seems like the theme. Let's go 21 carries, 96 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 catch for 3 yards.
I like
and
it.
I think
his
jersey's going to be in the third quarter. Let's just be more specific.
And when he has that, 4-yard catch, he's going to throw everything off.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. All right, now that wraps up essentially RotoCurve Live, RC Live for NFL DFS in Week 15. Let's take a look at all of the content we have on RotoCurve.com. A plethora of tools: quarterback, running back, receiver, and tight end cheat sheets. We have lineup builders. We have cheat sheets for every player as a whole. Red zone stats, snaps, targets, touches. We mentioned some tweets during the week with the top volume guys for receiver and the top bell cow backs. You can find all that information on the RotoCurve stat databases. We have consensus ranks with myself, Ricky Sanders, and Adam Pfeifer. We're trying to catch up to Adam. He's had an excellent season so far in consensus, so be sure to go check that out. Also have Brian Healy's cheat sheet is up. DFS Pro Brian Healy has his cheat sheet up on the site, and the guy is actually currently in California for a live final at the FanDuel WFFC. So good luck to Brian out there. Hope you take it down. You can win some serious bucks. Adam Pfeifer has his cash piece, which is about 12,000 words and worth to read every single one of them. He also has his GPP picks coming later today, and of course his bargains article that comes out on Wednesdays as well. Jim has one of my favorite pieces to read in a Rosters Market Watch. I love looking at the prices over there in Rosters because it's a bit
unique.
different.
It's unique, yeah. I mean, I did a lineup that has that affordably has Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson, and it still is a good lineup.
Yeah, exactly. I do like the way that is unique in that level. So be sure to check that out. He actually talked about lineup construction in that piece as well. So be sure to give that a read. All the content you can imagine for under $1 a day. There is not a better bargain out there in DFS. And one more thing, we have a promo on RotoCurve right now. You go to the top banner, you can see it. It links to rotocurve.com/big-game. It's exactly what you can think of right now. You can get 2 tickets to the big game in Houston. You can win. They're both lower level tickets. There's a tailgate before. There's an Antonio Brown event, a chance to meet some legends in the NFL as well. So it's going to be a great event. So be sure to go over there and try to win your tickets to the big game. This has been RotoCurve Live, RC Live for Week 15 NFL DFS. For Adam Pfeifer and Jim McCormick, I'm Josh Collacchi. Good luck, and let's win some Buckies.